Welcome to Spiritual Cartel's Big Book Main Share. This week I am pleased to introduce Adam T, who has kindly agreed to come and share for us. So Adam, it's over to you. Thank you.
My name is Adam. I am an addict. You guys can hear me? Great. Want to thank the group. Thank you for inviting me to come talk. It's an honor and a privilege to be asked to participate in Cocaine Anonymous. Ultimately, it's a responsibility to give back what was so freely given to me. Welcome to anybody that's new. If you're trying CA again, if you don't want to be here, if you don't think the 12 steps or Cocaine Anonymous will work for you, I didn't get to the rooms because I had a bad weekend. I had a couple of bad decades. And for me, like a lot of us, eventually this becomes a matter of life and death. I mean, I live in Southern California. It is kind of where CA started, not to brag. We know that. But I stood up in Cocaine Anonymous for 17 years as a newcomer. And from the very beginning, right out of high school, I had so many chips and key tags. You know the drill. I could have played poker with them. I remember one secretary saying, give them back. And I did that walk of shame over and over and over again. And looking back at that experience now, if you're new, I thank God for the unconditional love of the old timers. A lot of the old timers that had come from, the Mother Fellowship, Alcoholics Anonymous, and really pioneered and started Cocaine Anonymous. And they would say things to me like, don't even bother taking chips. Just sit in the back. Shut up. But in a loving way, right? But they made it really clear to me, and if you're new, I hope you hear this. They made it really clear to me that if and when I was ready, because somehow they could see it. They could see it by my demeanor. They could see it by my lack of interest. They could see it by my fidgety nature, maybe just by my age. I was like 20. They had the wisdom to see, from their experience, maybe by my attitude, that it wasn't right now. But those old timers were so kind. They were so gracious. They were so forgiving. They were so tolerant of my bad behavior in the rooms. And so welcoming, but they made it really clear to me. And again, if you're new, I hope you hear this. They made it really clear to me that if and when I was ready, that the doors of Cocaine Anonymous would always be open to an addict like me. And I think looking back at that experience now, if you're new, Cocaine Anonymous is probably the closest thing to unconditional love that a drug addict like me will ever experience. No matter how many people I burned, how many jobs I lost, how many cars I wrecked, how many hearts I broke, how many despicable, shameful things I did. And if you are, in fact, an addict, a cocaine addict, or any other mind-altering substance, it's the most shameful thing in the world to be the family dope fiend, especially if you come from a large family like I do, where my mom had 3 sisters and a brother. My dad had 3 brothers and a sister. And I can remember even in high school, I was covered in tracks. I was a full-blown junkie. And she would be on the phone with my relatives telling them everything. I would cringe. One more rubber room, one more overdose, one more robbery, one more car wreck. Happy birthday, Dad. I'm in jail. Does anybody here relate to being paid not to come home on the holidays? This is the holiday season. They would pay me. They knew I would come in right after Santa Claus and steal everything out of that house, go back and return it for money so I could do cocaine. They could see it, and it became so horrific. It was so awful what I did to my poor parents. And probably for the first decade, the first 10 years of my recovery, I was unable to see that destruction through the lens of Koanon or Al-Anon or whatever other family systemic group you want to look at. But I wasn't able to see it from the other side. But looking back at it now, in retrospect, I was a straight A student. I was atop of all my classes. I was a first generation American. All of my family is in the UK. I was an only child. My mom and dad were married over 50 years. And to watch those 2 really great parents, they were great parents, to watch those 2 souls literally watch me burn my life to the ground. To the point where eventually my mother had sold the family property. She moved and she did not leave a forwarding address. That's where I left my mom. It was horrific. And I didn't care. What's so fascinating about that, looking back, I was incapable. I was almost like narcissistic in that sense. I wasn't a narcissist because I've recovered. but I looked exactly like that, completely and absolutely self-centered. And looking back at it now, I thank God for the unconditional love of the people in the rooms. And eventually I started coming to meetings loaded. It's very interesting. We don't see a lot of people high in recovery anymore. And of course, I don't want to bash the therapeutic community, but where I live is called the Rehab Riviera, right? And I mean, for me, treatment would swoop me up in my most desperate moments, throw me into yoga class. I mean, that's still their answer, right? The downward dog. They have no idea how to deal with people like me. You know, they put me into craft hour and I'm making belt buckles and bongs, right? I mean, it's ridiculous. Nature walk. As soon as I get a chance, I'm walking to 7-Eleven, getting a big gulp cup, filling it up with liquor, putting a little Coca-Cola on top, walking back into the group meeting, doing some of my best sharing. And they have no idea what to do with me. In fact, maybe their approach works for the hard drinker, the problem drinker, someone that has a problem just with cocaine. But for me, it was inconceivable until I got around people in the rooms and I started coming to meetings loaded, and eventually I started going through institutions. This is just the progress. We have a chapter in the big book, the chapter to wives. I don't know if anybody's read that chapter, but the chapter to wives is very instructional in the sense that it talks about 4 types, and they're enumerated: type 1, type 2, type 3, and the 4th type, the type of addict that's been placed in one institution after another. Sound familiar? The type of addict that typically uses on his way home from the hospital. And really, if you study that part of the book, fascinating enough, it really illustrates the progression of addiction. Fun with problems, just problems. We can also look at it as magic, medicine, misery. But the idea of that 4th type, and that, in fact, in the chapter to wives, it talked about that's the one that actually has the most hope. I mean, Cocaine Anonymous is the only organization where the worse off you are, the better chance you actually have of recovering, which is fascinating. It's almost counterintuitive. But I started coming to meetings loaded. By the time I got sober again, I'd gone through residential treatment for drug addiction 28 times. Not 28 days like the movie, 28 consecutive times. And I remember wearing that like a badge of honor. I thought that's what made me an addict. And I remember telling my late sponsor, Dan Sherman, who's gone now, I went through treatment 28 times. I was hoping that would get rid of the guy, loser. I didn't want to ruin his batting average. He was one of those overzealous sponsors chasing me around with the big book. So I tell him I went through treatment 28 times, and he starts laughing hysterically, and he said to me, Adam, going through treatment 28 times doesn't make you an addict. And I thought, you're kidding? He says, oh no, that just means you paid $500,000 for a big book. And I didn't think that was funny, right? And I'm not going to start citing and quoting pages out of the big book. But page 101 of the big book, right, says any scheme that attempts to shield the addict from temptation is doomed to failure. See, treatment was a great place to fatten me up for another run. Treatment has its rightful place in recovery. Even Bill Wilson had gone through treatment. Look at the book. Dr. Silkworth says we favor hospitalization or treatment for the addict that's befogged or jittery. Some people don't go through treatment. Treatment probably saved my life. It definitely had a position where it put time between me and the bag of dope. Okay? But in and of itself, my experience is for me, treatment never solved the problem. And as a cocaine addict, like a lot of us, I always thought the problem was cocaine. I thought it was the bindle, the pipe, the syringe, the balloon. I thought it was the drink. And I remember someone in Cocaine Anonymous telling me, Adam, if drugs are your problem, maybe you're not an addict. And if you are, in fact, an addict, the type that's described in the doctor's opinion in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, your problem isn't just narcotics. And I remember thinking, what? It took another decade, 10 more years of suffering to understand the impact of that statement. It was almost like some kind of cruel riddle. I drank and used over that for years. But what happened to me, and if you're new, pay attention to that idea. What happened? Just like when Ebby came to visit Bill Wilson, and Bill had said something had happened to Ebby. Ebby was inwardly reorganized. His roots grasped new soil. What happened to me is I got around a group of big book literalists, enthusiasts, people in Cocaine Anonymous that took the statements in the big book, turned them into questions, and directed the questions at me. It's a teaching method called the Socratic method. Very simple ideas, like was I incapable of being honest with myself? Did I in fact drink and use because I like the effect produced by drugs and alcohol? Well, obviously that's a no-brainer, right? Duh. My other idea, like, was I incapable of being honest? Did I drink and use because I like the effect produced by cocaine? Was I restless, irritable, and discontent by nature? Very powerful question going through the doctor's opinion. Did I really understand what that meant? Was that my natural state? Was my greatest obsession that somehow, someday, I would control and enjoy an 8-ball? I mean, apply these ideas any way you want. And the last piece, if you're new, the real evidence that kind of closes that idea. Did I pursue that illusion, meaning just out of reach to the gates of insanity and death? And again, what happened? What happened to me when I went through those considerations, if you're new today or tonight, is for the first time I saw the truth. And the most obvious truth, what we call the external unmanageability, was crystal clear from the time I was in middle school. I remember being in 8th grade. I was already pissing in my pants. I was already drooling on my desk. I was already passed out under the bleachers. I overshot the mark from the very first time I used. My nickname in 8th grade was Space Cadet. I couldn't find homeroom. People were picking high schools. I was already picking rehabs. But if you're new tonight, the disease of addiction, like alcoholism, comes in people. It doesn't come in bottles or 6-packs or 12-packs or pipes or syringes or balloons. Addiction comes in people. And the greater aspect of this spiritual illness, as Bill Wilson describes it, centering in my mind, if going through the considerations in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous shows me anything at all, it shows me that an addict of my type, an addict of this type, cannot really live without cocaine. I cannot really live without drugs and alcohol. And what it means to be an addict, in part, is that I have a mind. If I look at my history and my relationship with cocaine, I have a mind that will continue to take me back to getting loaded. It takes me back to using. Every time I get released for an emergency room, a hospital, a fancy Malibu treatment center, right? Men's Central Jail, 5743, roll it up. It's amazing to me. I've been incarcerated for drunken in public and possession of narcotics more times than I can count. And I'm sitting in my little jail cell on my cot, casually reading a novel, not a cloud on the horizon. And I hear that release number, 5743, roll it up, you're being released. And suddenly there's this visceral compulsion in me that is so powerful that I'm vomiting on my way to the dope man, just with anticipation. I haven't even used yet. And you think at that point I'm going to call my sponsor? It's the last guy I'm going to call. As soon as I hear that release number, I have this visceral compulsion in me that is so powerful. And this may or may not sound familiar to you, that I can't even stop at the release module for my property. That anticipation that happens once I make that decision to use, there is nothing on God's earth, no sober coach, no sponsor, there's nothing that's going to stop me unless I can find some access to a power. And I come to recovery and people say things to me like, well, don't use no matter what. And I'm like, what happened at the top of page 24? If you're new, please read it. It says, every addict passes through the state where even the strongest desire is of absolutely no avail. It says, for someone like me, my willpower will become virtually non-existent. Now, the doctor's opinion is very clear. It talks about some people are entirely normal in every respect except the effect produced by narcotics. Normal, able, friendly people. There's a lot of people like that. See, they've lost control, but they haven't lost choice. And I have to make this very clear when I'm working with people. I got a car outside. It's got no brakes, okay? It's got no brakes. Now, I know if I get in that car, I take it out of gear, I'm going to hit a couple cars on my street, probably going to make a left turn. I'm going to sideswipe a couple more cars. I'm going to get on that highway. I'm going to take out another couple people. I know I've got no brakes. Now, the guy that's entirely normal in every respect, he knows he's got a car with no brakes. He'll never get in that car again. And he's able to come to Cocaine Anonymous, go to meetings once a week, never work a step, take another anniversary, and his life gets better. He's been serene since his ass hit the seat in Cocaine Anonymous. That is not my experience. What happens to someone like me is I know I've got no control. I know I've got a car with no brakes, but I just want to sit in that car. I want to reminisce about what I used to do in the back seat. See, there's something in me that continues to take me back, even though I know I've lost control. That is the cover charge for Cocaine Anonymous. Loss of control. Once I take a hit, the hit takes a hit. That's what happens. That is the physical component of addiction. But the second piece, the loss of choice. This idea, if you're new, that I cannot bring into my consciousness with sufficient force the pain and suffering of a week or a month ago. If you're new, it's a death sentence. That peculiar mental blank spot. When you look at Fred's story, you look at Jim's story, you look at these ideas. These ideas are very specific. The type of addict that's unwilling to admit he cannot use. The one that believes after a certain period of time that it enables him to use like a gentleman, right? These ideas are all traps in chapter 3. I have to look at every one of those and understand these ideas. And although self-knowledge will not fix me, it starts to bring me to that which will. And there's something much greater if you're new here tonight. And what it is loss of power. And if you look at the word power in We Agnostics, it's used 25 times. It means the lens through which I see the world is so distorted that my own mother looks at me and says, for God's sake, son, you were nicer. Have a cigarette while you're at it. And unless I can develop that sense of comfort and ease that I'm seeking from drugs and alcohol through this spiritual process, an addict like me will never stay here. So I had to understand, and to finish this idea, if you're new today, when I hear people say don't use no matter what, and I know they mean well, and for many people in Cocaine Anonymous, it is their truth. There is a translation for a hope to die addict like me, and pay attention if you're new. Go to meetings no matter what. Work steps no matter what. Maintain commitments no matter what. Be of service no matter what. Develop this discipline of steps 10, 11, and 12, which is peace in 10, power in 11, purpose in 12. And just like the doctor's opinion says, this is the message of hope. As strange as this may seem to those who do not understand, once a psychic change has occurred, this very same person, me, who seemed absolutely doomed, who lived in institutions for 17 years, is suddenly, easily able to control my desire to get loaded. It is an absolute miracle what Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob and all the people that put this together. Carl Jung, it went to Roland Hazard, it went to Ebby Thatcher, it went to Bill Wilson, and now it's come to us. This very simple idea. Carl Jung put together this idea. Ideas, attitudes, and emotions that were once the guiding force of people like me are suddenly cast to one side, and a whole new set of conceptions begins to dominate. He saw that as being the answer. He was a student of Sigmund Freud's. Him and William James, they couldn't sit in the same room together because they had such opposing ideas. But Carl Jung put that together. Roland Hazard went back to New York, and he bumped into Sam Shoemaker and Frank Buckman, a group called the Oxford Group. And the Oxford Group had actually a roadmap to bring about that type of change. And if you really look at the history, the Oxford Group met at the Hollywood Bowl, very close to where I live, in 1939, the same year as the big book was published. There's a word called enthusiasm. If you've ever heard the word, it actually means theos. It means filled with the Spirit of God. And the Oxford Group thought there were 4 things that blocked a human being from God, and this is what they are. 1, a luxury I will not forgo. 2, a secret I will not confess. 3, a restitution I will not make. 4, someone or something I cannot forgive. And what they believed is if a human being was clear to these 4 blocks, the light of God for those that believe, or the light of the Spirit for those of agnostic temperament, would shine through that person like a beacon. And what they called that was a conversion experience. But if you look at the ideas, the luxuries I will not forgo, it's selfishness. It's everything I put before my recovery. Dishonesty, right? The secrets I will not confess, dishonesty. A restitution I will not make, fear. My faulty relationship with God based on self-reliance. And the last piece, resentment, someone or something I cannot forgive. And it's such an amazing thing. If you're new, I knew there was laws of physics, inertia, velocity, centrifugal force. I'd had calculus in high school. I was pretty well kind of established in the scientific community. And someone suggested to me, why wouldn't there be spiritual laws? Why wouldn't there be some fundamental ideas that if I could apply those ideas to my life, I would have a revolution in the way I saw life and God's universe. It's clear on page 25. The leveling of our pride, the self-searching, the confession of shortcomings. That is the fundamental foundation that becomes the thing that has to be changed. And what I didn't understand is these ideas over a period of time, if you're new, this is very much like the mechanics, but these are spiritual laws. And my experience is when I started to take these actions, it's kind of like we talk about, there's a meeting called addition by subtraction, and it's very simple. When they asked Michelangelo, how did you make the statue of David? Michelangelo said, well, I never really made the statue of David. I just chipped away everything that wasn't David, and there he was. Such a remarkable idea. It's kind of like if you tell a 5-year-old child, go in your room and straighten out your room. He doesn't want to do it. You say to that same young person, go in your room and throw out all your old stuff and we'll buy you new stuff. How long would that take? And what I didn't understand is that if and when I became teachable, we're begging of you if you're an addict. There's people maybe even today on this platform that may never see 2026 because of my defiance towards spiritual principles. When I really understood that idea, that one of the definitions just of the word program, if you look it up in computer science, the definition of the word program is a sequential set of instructions designed to bring about a result. Now listen to the language, the parallel language. What do you do when you get a corrupt file on the computer? Well, it's obvious. You install a recovery disk. And the function of that disk is to restore the program to an earlier point in the process, the second step. What would it be like to have a life that had no fear? What would it be like to have a life that didn't have resentment, to be free of selfishness, to be free of dishonesty? The original self, the self that's not corrupted by selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. That's the restoration. But for me, like a lot of us, that didn't happen until I took these very simple instructions in 4 through 7 and started to apply them in 10, 11, and 12. 10 clears the channel, 11 fills the channel, 12 empties it. Lord, make me a channel of thy peace. These ideas are fundamental spiritual laws. And when I look back at 17 years of failure, if you're new here, what I see in my life is my defiance towards spiritual principles. And the original manuscripts, since we're talking about the book, it's such a pleasure to be able to talk about the big book in a meeting. The original manuscript in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous said, rarely have we seen a person fail that's thoroughly followed our directions. And if you're new today, I don't like directions. I mean, I don't like being told not to do something I already don't want to do. Sound familiar? I will argue with anybody about anything at any time. You tell me it's black, I'll tell you it's white. You tell me it's big, I'll tell you it's small. You tell me to go left, I'll go right with an attitude. That's why we say denial is an acronym. It stands for don't even notice I am lying. Think about it. You could tell an addict, you can't tell them much. If you don't believe me, try sponsoring somebody. And what that means, if you're new, is you can lead me into the gates of hell, but you can't push me into heaven. And when we talk about attraction rather than promotion in the 11th tradition, if you're new, what that meant to an addict like me is eventually I would come back to Cocaine Anonymous on my own terms. Not because Sober Living wanted me to, not because my parole officer wanted me to, not because DCSF thought it was a good idea. I mean, I live on the west side of Los Angeles. They all get clean here for the trust fund. But see, hope doesn't matter to an addict like me until I'm hopeless. You think hope matters to me when I got $500,000 left in the bank, brand new Harley in the driveway, little boat down in the marina? Because I've had all of that. You wouldn't catch me dead in a Cocaine Anonymous meeting. And my experience, if you're new here, is that God didn't matter to me until my back was against the wall. And this isn't gutter bravado. What happened to me is I got shot in a little argument, right? And it went right through me. I'm laying on the gurney. I've got the paramedics over me with the paddles. And I'll tell you, I've never been closer to God in my life, right? I mean, it's like if you ever had the dry heaves, have you ever been dope sick and you got your head in the toilet every morning? Who prays more than addicts like us, right? So I've got, they put a tampon. That's how they deal with gunshot wounds. I know you don't have a lot of guns in the UK, but we have them everywhere here. So they put a tampon right through my chest to stop the bleeding, and they cart me off to the emergency room, right? And I'm sitting in this emergency room, and I'd never, like I said, never been closer to God in my life. I mean, the thought occurred to me at that moment, all I want to do is tell my sweet mom how much I love her and how sorry I was for torturing her and ruining her life. So the cardiologist does a thing called an angiogram where he runs this cord through my groin. He pumps the dye through my heart on this TV screen. And he looks at me and he smiles and he says, the bullet missed all the vital organs. You're going to be fine. And I went from, God, I will do anything you ask of me. The very next thought is, where's my pipe? Where's my crack pipe? And I need to get out of this hospital before law enforcement shows up. It's that quick. I go from, God, I will do anything you ask of me, to the very next thought is, I'm on the run again. So, and I'm telling you this for one reason. Because if you're new here today, there's a huge difference between the act of surrender that got me into recovery over and over and over and over, and the state of surrender that's keeping the old timers here. There's three ways people get to recovery: crisis, intervention, and they just get tired. My experience is the first two did not work for me. They slowed me down a little bit. But see, the longest trip for an addict isn't from my head to my heart. That's the therapeutic idea. The longest trip for people like me is from my knees to the ground. See, it is only at that point that I become teachable. That's the way we say, you don't realize God's all you need till God's all you have. And I did not understand that this is not an intellectual pursuit. Even in the 12 and 12, if you want to talk about the big book, they talk about the first two steps being experiential. There is no action. I may reflect on it and come to the ideas of loss of choice, loss of control, loss of power, the hard drinker, the moderate drinker, the real alcoholic. I may look at those ideas. But this is also an experience. It has to be experiential. In other words, we can plant the seeds for a newcomer. You know what waters the seeds? Cocaine. See, the suffering had to bring me to a place for me. Now, it may not be true for everybody. Some people can come here and they understand they got a car with no brakes. I'm never going to get in the car again. That is not what happens to people like me. It's even like alcohol. See, alcohol is classified by the AMA as a depressant. 9 out of 10 people, they have a couple drinks and they say stuff like, oh my gosh, I got work tomorrow. I'm feeling it. I have a couple drinks and I want to get married. I have a couple drinks. I want to go to Vegas tonight, right? See, I have a different effect that happens when I do drugs and alcohol. I do a little cocaine. I want to start a business with you, right? I do some math and I want to clean the house. I have an abnormal reaction to drugs and alcohol. In fact, most people do drugs and they feel out of control. I get high and I feel in control. When I get high, you suffer. When I don't get high, I suffer. These are very different ideas than what you're going to hear. And until I understand that problem, what really happens to an addict like me is I stop using, the outsides get better, the insides get worse. This may or may not make sense to you. And the longest bridge I'm ever going to cross, the longest journey I will ever walk in recovery is that little dash between the first and second half of step one. It's telling me, obviously, I got a body that can't process cocaine. What I don't see is I have a mind that cannot process reality. Not to my liking. So I got a body that can't use and a mind that has to. You don't think that's a dilemma? And that's what the Al-Anons can't figure out about us. They can't figure out why we get high. We can't figure out why you don't. And I thought for years, because I use, therefore, my life's unmanageable. And see, if you're new today, that's a half-truth. That's like looking at the tip of an iceberg and seeing the ruined marriage, broken home, financial destitution, the failing health, and thinking that's the problem. In fact, that's what treatment told me the problem was. That's why I'm sitting in another fancy treatment center in my nightgown, learning about my triggers. And I'm like, excuse me, counselor, waking up's a trigger for me. I'm awake. And what Cocaine Anonymous is telling me is something completely different. It's telling me for an addict like me, the trigger is actually on the inside. You ever notice when an addict's not having a good day? It's when I'm not getting my way. Oh, come on. We're all like 5-year-old kids here with old people's faces. You don't believe it? Cross one of us. I'll resent you for decades and your grandkids. But in Latin, resentment means to re-feel. It means I've taken an event from my past, consciously or subconsciously. I've attached an emotion to it, and then I re-feel it, I recreate it, I replay it, I re-engage in it. My life becomes like spiritual Groundhog Day. And unless, like Dr. Silkworth says, I can experience an entire psychic change, there's very little hope of my recovery. It's a death sentence. And what I didn't understand about meetings, it's like if I saw a bodybuilder and I want to look like him, you think I can follow him to his gym and sit in the lobby for an hour a day and talk about working out? I might even buy the outfit. I get the Adidas outfit. I'm looking great. I'm in the meeting every day, right? Talking about working out, but I've never done an exercise. Until I started to go through the book. There's a lot of different ways to go through the book. One way is to turn all the statements into questions. Another way is prayers, promises, warnings, and directions, 4-colored highlighters. So I'm looking laterally now at all the warnings. I'm looking laterally at the prayers. I'm looking laterally at the directions. And it's giving me some very simple directions that when I take such a position, right? This position, I have to stop playing God. I have to stop being the authority in my own life. I relinquish control. These ideas in the book are magnificent. If you don't know, the big book is on the top 88 books in the United States Library of Congress that shaped America. Okay? It's affected somewhere between 30 to 40 million people worldwide through all the sister and cousin programs. You know why I don't think it's going to work for me? Because it wasn't my idea. But even Harvard and Stanford, 2 of our universities on this side of the pond, studied the effectiveness of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the conclusion was the same. The results of Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12 steps as adopted by Cocaine Anonymous, exceed all the other modalities combined. Against the stream, refuge recovery, smart recovery. Maybe they're all helpful, but this works the best for the most. And these instructions that I was willing to take over a period of time started to change my perception of reality. It's just that simple. So thank God, I know there's only a little bit of time, but thank God we don't look like our stories. Because what happened to me, and if you're new, you'll hear that a lot, what happened? What happened to me is I got to one more treatment center, right? I'm 120 pounds, I'm dying of addiction, right? I had tracts from my wrist to my neck. I'd been on methadone maintenance, which was the precursor to Suboxone and Subutex, right? I was on methadone maintenance for 10 years. This is the way I came in. You know, I was like, like in Kensington, we see those people, they look like laptops, they're like half like that. That's what I was. I was one of those people. I was on lifetime methadone maintenance. I was never going to get out of it. And I remember Dan S. said to me, Adam, how free do you want to be? Do you want to be free enough to just survive addiction, or do you want to be free enough to chase your dreams? Free enough to have relationships that work, free enough to navigate around the drama, free enough to match calamity with serenity, free enough to stay in fit spiritual condition. And like salesmanship, he turned me on to this idea of hope, that there was a way out. The original manuscript of Alcoholics Anonymous, one of the titles they thought about was The Way Out. See, alcoholism is the only prison where the key's inside. What I didn't understand is I had to do the spiritual work. So I get to this treatment center, 120 pounds, dying of addiction. You know, I'm in my nightgown with my ass hanging out, right? Judging the speaker. It's so funny how we're the only people that can be on the curb and still look down at the world. That's why pride is the first of the 7 aspects of self in the inventory. So I'm sitting in this treatment center, you know, in my nightgown with my fellow associates, and a woman comes in from hospitals and institutions. If you don't know what H&I is, it's a committee that brings meetings into prisons, detoxes, treatment centers, hospitals, anywhere where clients, patients, or inmates can't get to meetings. Our H&I here is huge. And, you know, we also call it homies and inmates, but it's a committee, right? So this woman's on this H&I panel. She's in the detox. She's doing her talk. We're in the audience. And at the end of her talk, she looks us all up and down and she says, if I could give you all the gift of recovery, I wouldn't do it. And I remember looking at her and I looked at the guy next to me and I thought, and I said it to the guy next to me, I said, what a bitch. And what she said was, she said, the reason I wouldn't give you the gift of recovery, the reason I wouldn't give it to you is because I wouldn't rob you of the journey. And all these years later, I've come to understand that that journey to recovery, just like that journey to surrender, that each and every one of us addicts has to walk. If you're new, we can't give you that. And again, if you're in a jacuzzi tub with a fifth of whiskey, an 8-ball, and a supermodel, and daddy sends you to rehab, we don't expect you to be happy. I mean, we talk about, oh, my worst day sober is better than my best day using. I'm like, are you out of your mind? Are you out of your mind? But my worst day sober is better than my last day using. That last 5 years where the disease killed me every day and it wouldn't bury me. When I was walking around with that broken crack pipe with no Brillo, with no lighter, the disease was killing me every day and it wouldn't bury me. And if you're new, that is a fate almost worse than death. There's a word in the spiritual community called purgatory. And it may be, we know where it comes from, but the idea is the simple idea. It means to be caught between two worlds. I can't live out there loaded anymore because it's just too painful, but I cannot be clean and sober and happy at the same time. And why do you think that is? The greatest battle in a man or woman's life is not against their brother or sister. It's against themselves. And the reason I can't be sober and happy if you're new, that second idea, is because I'm unwilling to let go of my old ideas. See, when I go through the sixth step, I look at pride. The opposite of pride is humility. It means to be teachable. The opposite of anger is self-control. That is the virtue. The opposite of lust is chastity. That is the virtue. The opposite of greed is charity. And the idea of having a way to maintain this state of surrender, this posture of humility. There's a spiritual function. There's a lot of math I look at in recovery. And one of the function is humility, which means to be teachable, plus service equals gratitude. And if you're new today, do you know what the opposite of gratitude is? It's entitlement. And when I started to understand my entitlement, especially this time of year, right? There's only two kinds of people on the holidays. There's guests and there's hosts. Now, the guest is never happy. I wanted onions on my burger. I don't like the rent-a-car. I wanted a king-size bed. Honey, what did you get me for my birthday? Right? The guest is never happy. But the host, see, I am the host. I am the usher. I am the servant. I have to come from a place of humility. How can I be helpful? How can I be of service? How can I be useful? There's three prayers in this life. One is, God help me. That's the addict's prayer. The second is, God give me. Greatest distraction on earth. The prayer I never said was, God use me. And I get the privilege and the honor of maybe being helpful to one person today. One person. Maybe one person might think, maybe CA can work for me too. All these lessons, like you guys talked about, look at the similarities. When I take people through Bill's story, it's the same thing. Did I use like Bill? Did I think like Bill? Did I feel like Bill? Was I as hopeless as Bill? I take Bill out of the story in Bill's story. I take golf out of the story, World War I, stock market, gender, all of that. And I ask those questions. Do I see Bill's grandiosity, his sensitivity, his emotional immaturity, Bill's omnipotence? The first half of Bill's story is his decline. The second half is his recovery. In the second half, I look at all the things that Bill did, and I question what I am unwilling to do. The three sides of the triangle, when he goes through the steps with Ebby, and he says, in and of myself, I am nothing. The word I is used 19 times on that page. The word we is used once. And it said, we made a list of people whom I was angry and I had harmed. There's only two people there. That means that Ebby walked Bill through this process. At the top of the next page, it says, Lois and I abandoned ourselves with enthusiasm to the idea of helping others. That's the service piece. And at the bottom of that page, it says, we attended meetings frequently so newcomers could find the fellowship. That's the unity piece. So all these ideas, all these spiritual instructions going through the book lead to one place, a spiritual awakening, a psychic change, and the place where I can become useful. I can become helpful to another human being. And what I didn't understand, like my sponsor said, Adam, He said, selfishness isn't thinking less of yourself. It's thinking about yourself less, right? I have to think about myself less. In fact, for me, a lot of my problems have died from neglect. I mean, especially this time of year. My dad, 94 years old, from the UK, Korean War, the love of my life. He fell like 2 weeks ago and broke his back. And he's in a nursing home, and I have spent all of my spare time taking care of this guy. This guy's been the love of my life. And what happened during that time is I've been asked to help all these newcomers. I mean, the phones like not stop ringing with people. You would think that would distract me from helping my dad, but it stopped me from focusing on this negative, morbid thinking. And I'm thinking, oh, look what I'm going through. My dad's the guy with the broken back. He's 94. He might make it. He's one of the toughest, nicest men I've ever seen. But when I am faced with calamity, I am going to be able to match that with serenity. It is when the chips are down and everything is difficult, like that poem by Rudyard Kipling, if these ideas that I have been able to implement into my life will carry me through the most difficult times in my life. And I did not understand that I've not had to go through anything alone. I'm an only child, like I said. And you know what? I have developed such beautiful people in my life because of Cocaine Anonymous. And I'm going to finish. I know where the time is. I get to fly a lot. I love Andy. Andy and I have done some workshops together, but I'm at this airport, right? And I'm getting on this plane, and this guy comes charging me from across the terminal, and he's wearing a slingshot t-shirt. Some of you girls know the look. He's got the full body tattoo. I mean, it's kind of cute, right? But he gets me up against the wall, and he's like, you don't remember me, do you? I mean, he looked like he was right out of San Quentin. And I said, no, I don't remember you. And he had these two little girls with him, 2 kids, and he had this wife with him. He goes, and he says to me, and I thought he was going to ask me for money. You know, you get approached at an airport. And he said to me, 15 years ago, you spoke on a prison panel, and something you said changed my life. He said, these are my beautiful daughters. This is my amazing wife. This is my family. We want to thank you. And all of a sudden, the wife starts crying. The faucet comes on. The wife's crying. Now her little daughters are crying. Now I'm crying. A minute ago, I didn't know whether to run or call security. Now we look like the long-lost family from the old country. And of course, my head's getting big. Now I'm thinking, you know, I knew I was a Dalai Lama, right? So I make the mistake of calling my sponsor. My sponsor's like, Adam, you got a big mouth and a good memory. Don't let it go to your head. And he hung up on me. But if you're new tonight, there's only 2 dates in a human being's life. The day we're born and the day we find out why. All my life, I thought it was about money, property, prestige, job, house, girl, car, bigger job, newer car, different girl, bigger house, different job. But see, vomit smells the same in a Mercedes. Puke smells the same in a Land Rover, okay? All my life, I tried to solve a spiritual problem with a physical solution. I put down the cocaine, pick up the drink, put down the drink, pick up the credit card, put down the credit card, start acting out in the rooms. There's like a couple hundred 12-step programs. They're all identical except for the first half of step 1. What the big book is saying is if and when I straighten out spiritually, only then will I straighten out mentally and physically. It's such a powerful idea. There's a guy named Wayne Dyer. He says, you come to this earth with absolutely nothing. You will leave with nothing. There's only one thing, whether you're Warren Buffett, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, there's only one thing I can do while I'm on this earth. Give it all away. And what I didn't understand, and I'm not talking about the money, but we are in an organization, Cocaine Anonymous, where the currency here is experience, strength, and hope. That every single individual on this platform right now is able to help somebody in a way that no one else can. This unique ability that we can share something with another human being. And go through the instructions in the chapter Working with Others. He didn't use words like codependency, enabling, and boundaries, but all those ideas are there. I will not work at someone's recovery harder than they are. But if they are willing to walk this path with me, I will walk to the gates of hell with them and back. There's a poem in Notre Dame. It says, I sought my God I could not see. I sought my soul I could not free. I sought my brother, and I found all 3. That's why we say nothing ensures immunity from using more than intensive work with others. It is our 12th and final suggestion. I will leave you with that. Happy holidays.